welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
You've brought us like a treasure trove of stuff on Amy Tan.
I did.
Get ready to like really go beyond just, the typical, oh, here are the highlights of this author's career kind of bio. We're going to like really get into it.
Yeah.
We're going to uncover how like her childhood, she had this like bridging of two cultures thing going on, and then her family had all this love, but also tragedy.
Right.
And then she even battled a debilitating illness. And we're going to see how all of that shaped her as a writer, as this literary powerhouse.
And I think what's so fascinating about her, right, is that she doesn't shy away from any of it, right? Like all of that difficult stuff is actually what fuels her work, right?
Yeah.
Like her exploration of identity, family dynamics, the immigrant experience. She goes there.
Yeah, she does not hold back. So, okay, let's like start right at the beginning. Amy Tan, born in Oakland, 1952, to Chinese immigrant parents. So right away, boom, this idea of two worlds colliding, right? Like that becomes like so central, such a central thread in like understanding who she is and what she writes.
Well, and it's important to kind of think about that, too. It's not just that she's living in two worlds, but she's actively building an identity within that intersection. So you have to imagine, navigating traditional Chinese values at home, but then also absorbing American culture outside the home. So there's this constant kind of negotiation and push and pull between belonging and otherness. And I think that really becomes a defining thread throughout her work.
Yeah, totally. And then you bring in like her mom, Daisy Tan. It seems from everything that like you sent over, she's like a force, like just this incredible presence in Amy Tan's life. And seems like their relationship was, obviously very loving, but also like really complicated,
Really complicated. And I think to understand Daisy's influence on Amy, you really have to consider like the trauma that she was carrying. She had to leave her first family behind in China, and that experience inevitably shaped her approach to motherhood. So it created this very, intense and sometimes really turbulent dynamic with her daughter. Yeah.
Total. And it makes you think about how like our parents' past experiences, especially those involving like loss and resilience, how that just like echoes down through the generations.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And with Amy, this kind of intergenerational dance between love and loss and cultural identity, it becomes, I think, even more poignant when you consider what happened when she was a teenager.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. Okay, so at 15, she loses, are you ready for this? Both her dad and her older brother to brain tumors within months of each other.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, at 15, it's unimaginable, first of all, just like the grief, the sheer sense of loss that she must have endured at such like a critical time in her development in her life.
The impact of that kind of loss at that age, right? Like you're just beginning to figure out who you are in the world. It's huge. It's immense. And it's no coincidence that those themes, right, of grief, of familial bonds, this search for identity, like appear again and again in her writing. It's almost as if those early losses ignited a need in her to explore those emotions, to find meaning, to find connection through storytelling.
Wow. And what's so interesting to me about her story is that, she becomes this celebrated novelist, but it seems like she took a kind of like roundabout path to get there. So did she always know she wanted to be a writer? Or like, what's the deal?
So this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Her journey to literary stardom was not a straight line.
Okay.
In fact, before she ever wrote, any of these famous novels, she honed her craft in a completely different world. Technical writing.
Wait, so what, instruction manuals?
Instruction manual.
Like software guides, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I mean, that seems to me anyway, like a world away from the kind of like writing that she does with, the evocative prose and the intricate narratives in her novels. Like it just seems so different.
Exactly.
Right.
But I think when you look a little deeper, those years that she spent wrestling with these technical details, they were probably more influential than, you might initially think.
Interesting.
So imagine the precision required for technical writing, right? The need to communicate complex information with absolute clarity.
Oh, yeah.
And conciseness.
Yeah.
It likely really instilled in her this meticulous approach to language. Like she knows what each word is doing. And I think that is evident in her fiction.
That's so fascinating. So it's like those years weren't a detour. They were like boot camp.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if any specific projects or even just like themes from those days ended up in her novels later on. But either way, it does seem like eventually she took this leap of faith and went all in on fiction.
She did, and thank goodness for that.
Right.
So mid-30s, right? Years of honing her craft in that other world of writing.
Mm.
She takes the plunge. And in 1989, her debut novel, The Joy Luck Club, hits the literary scene.
I mean, talk about a debut novel, right?
I know, right?
This is the novel that launched her career. It became this, like, phenomenon.
A phenomenon.
This cultural touchstone.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a success, it was a literary earthquake.
I love that.
I mean, this intricate tapestry of interconnected stories, right, weaving together the lives of these 4 Chinese immigrant mothers and their American-born daughters just captivated readers and critics. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for, are you ready for it, over half a year.
Wow.
Which is a testament to its power to resonate.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not hard to see why it resonated, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the themes of family, cultural identity, the immigrant experience, those are like universal.
Absolutely.
Those are like at the core of what it means to be human.
Right, exactly.
You know, but despite all the acclaim, the Joy Luck Club wasn't without its critics.
Right.
Right.
And some people argued that her portrayal of Chinese culture, especially the mothers, sometimes veered into like stereotypes. And so I think it's important for us to actually unpack that a little bit. And we'll do that after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Stick with us. We're going to be right back with more on Amy Tan's story and the power of her storytelling. So we were talking about the Joy Luck Club and how, this incredibly successful, like groundbreaking book also stirred up some controversy, especially around how it portrayed Chinese culture.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because that's a conversation that comes up a lot, I think, when you're looking at literature that's dealing with cultural identity, right?
Yeah.
It's like, can you ever really, truly represent an entire culture in a book?
Right.
And I think when it's your own culture that you're writing about, like, the stakes get even higher. Totally. Because then it's like not just about telling a good story, but it's also about, like, are you shaping perceptions about this culture? Are you challenging stereotypes? Or are you accidentally reinforcing them? So when critics, raise those concerns about the mothers in the Joy Luck Club, how did Amy Tan respond to that?
She responded, I think, with a lot of thoughtfulness and also conviction.
Okay.
So on the one hand, she was very clear that her work is personal. It's drawn from her own experiences, her own family dynamics.
Right.
She wasn't trying to speak for all Chinese mothers or all Chinese daughters. It was really about her own specific experience.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Because like every family, every relationship has its own unique thing going on. And then when you add in cultural differences and the immigrant experience, it's like, whoa, it gets even more like multi-layered.
Exactly. But she also pushed back against this idea that she had a responsibility to portray Chinese culture in like a certain way, like there was only one right way to show it. And she argued that, if you limit writers to only positive or, what are seen as like acceptable representations of their own culture, it's going to stifle creativity.
Right.
And it's going to limit the possibility for honest storytelling.
Right. Yeah, it's such a tricky thing, because it's like, how do you represent a culture authentically, but then also like recognize that there's no one right way to do it? It reminds me of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I don't know if you've ever read her. She talks about the danger of the single story.
Right.
And it's that idea that, when we reduce a group of people to a single narrative, it's incredibly limiting. And honestly, it can even be like harmful.
Absolutely. And I think that's why that conversation about representation, which her work, sparked in part, is so important.
Yeah.
Because it encourages us, both as readers, as consumers of art, to really think critically about whose stories are being told,
Yeah.
and from what perspective.
Totally.
And to think about, what potential biases might be at play.
It's about going beyond that single story, right?
Sure.
And embracing the messiness, the contradictions, because that's what real life is, right?
Absolutely.
And speaking of messy and complicated, the research that you pulled actually took this like really interesting turn when it got into Amy Tan's own health challenges.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, her struggle with Lyme disease is like, you can't tell her story without talking about that, It's a huge part of her story. And I think it reveals like a whole other layer of her resilience.
Totally. And for our listeners who might not know a lot about Lyme disease, can you just give like a little like Lyme disease 101? Like, how did it affect her life, especially as a writer? Because, her whole livelihood is about using her mind.
It's like if you were, a carpenter and suddenly you couldn't use your hands.
Right.
She's a wordsmith. She puts these stories together and suddenly her main tool, her mind, isn't working the way that it should.
Yeah.
And so Lyme disease is an illness that's, it's transmitted by ticks. It often comes with all of these different cognitive difficulties.
Oh, wow.
So brain fog, memory issues, difficulty finding words, which for a writer, that's your world.
It's brutal. It's like, I don't even know. It's like a cruel irony almost,
Yes.
It's like you're a writer and you get hit with this illness that like directly impacts your ability to do what you do. So you would think, okay, she's going to retreat. She's going to focus on just like getting better, right?
Right.
But that is not Amy Tan.
Not at all.
No.
Not even
It's just
a
like Lyme disease. You want to mess with me? Watch this.
Right. She took those challenges and she used them as fuel for her writing, which I think is a real testament to her strength.
Wow.
Her determination,
Mm-hmm.
that even in the midst of battling this really debilitating illness, she kept creating, she kept going to those dark places, and she wrote about it with so much honesty, so much vulnerability.
It's like, in a way, her writing became this other form of healing, right? Like another tool in her toolbox.
Yeah.
A way to process what she was going through, and then also to connect with other people who might be dealing with similar things,
Absolutely. Her memoir, Where the Past Begins, came out in 2017, I think gives a really intimate look at this period in her life.
Yeah.
And it's such a powerful exploration of memory, of family history, and really how our past experiences shape who we are while she's dealing with this chronic illness,
So even with everything she was going through, her voice didn't get smaller, it didn't get quieter, it got stronger.
It did. It got more resonant.
Mm.
It's just infused with this hard-won wisdom.
Which I think is such a powerful message, right, for all of us. That even when things are tough, even when you get knocked down, there's a way not just to survive, but to actually, thrive.
Right. And I think it speaks to the power of stories.
Totally. Yeah.
How they connect us, how they comfort us, how they inspire us, even in those really, really tough times.
100%. So, we've been talking about this incredible life, this incredible career, all these ups and downs. What is it about Amy Tan's stories that make them connect with people so deeply? Because it's not just people who've had similar experiences to her. It's like her work reaches everyone.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's like she takes these incredibly specific things, right? Like those two worlds colliding in her childhood, that really intense relationship with her mother, the tragedy she experienced, even dealing with Lyme disease, and somehow she finds this way to make those experiences resonate with people who've never gone through anything like that.
It's like by going so deep into her own very specific, personal stuff, she accidentally opens up this door to something that's way bigger,
Oh, yeah.
And it's like we get to look into this world and maybe it's totally different from anything we've ever experienced ourselves. But we're like, oh, yeah, I get that. I
Yeah.
feel that.
Totally. And I think what it does is it reminds us that beyond all the things that make us different on the surface, our cultures, our generations, whatever it might be, we're all connected by these shared human experiences. Love, loss, resilience, that search for connection.
Totally. And there's something really powerful about feeling seen and heard like that,
Absolutely.
And it's interesting how she does that too, because it's not like you're reading her novels and it's like, here's the message or here's what you should learn from this.
Right.
It's not like that at all. It's just, she's just being real,
Right. She doesn't shy away from the messiness of it all, the contradiction, the parts that don't fit neatly into a box. And I think that's what makes it so relatable.
Exactly. She's like, this is life, people, in all its messy glory. And it makes you think, maybe those messy parts, those complicated parts, maybe those are actually where the really good stuff is. That's where we learn, that's where we grow, that's where we find empathy, that's where we connect with each other in those vulnerable, messy places.
100%. And I think through those raw, vulnerable spaces in her writing, she gives us this incredible gift, which is the opportunity to really see ourselves reflected in her characters, even if their lives are drastically different from our own.
Yes.
And to say, oh, there's my humanity, there's my struggle, there's my joy, reflected back at me.
It's like she's holding up this mirror to what it means to be human. It's amazing. So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here, what would you say is the most important thing you hope people take away from Amy Tan's story, from her resilience, from this incredible talent that she has to turn her own life into art that connects with the whole world?
I think her story tells us that we should embrace all of it. Like all those experiences, the good, the bad, the messy, because within those experiences are the seeds of really powerful stories.
Yes.
And those stories have the power to connect us, to help us understand each other, and maybe even to make a little more sense of this crazy world we live in.
I love that. That is beautifully said. Amy Tan, everybody, taking her own truth, her own experiences, and turning them into this gift for all of us. Thank you so much for sharing all this amazing insight with us today. This has been
Yeah,
incredible.
it's such a pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, we hope this deep dive has, sparked your curiosity and maybe even inspired you to go back and revisit some of Amy Tan's incredible work. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep seeking out those stories that really light you up because that's what it's all about. Until next time.